What's up, sports fans? So today, college football fans, we're going to do a little something different. Today, I'm going to talk about the playoff picture just within the SEC. We'll talk Big Ten later, but in this video, we'll talk about the SEC. So there's 6 teams in the SEC that have either 1 or 2 losses. Chances are 4 or 5 of them will make the college football playoffs. More realistically, 4 of them will probably make the college football playoffs. It could be 5, but 5 at the most. So there's 6 right now with at least 1 loss. Well, 1 loss Texas, and everyone else has 2. So I want to react to some comments that Lane Kiffin made on ESPN. So let me go in right now and check out these comments that Lane Kiffin make for y'all. All right, let's hear what Lane Kiffin had to say about the situation.
I've talked to other coaches, so I'll just kind of give you the feeling from some other coaches that, they don't want to be in it. And, the risk to get a bye, the reward to get a bye versus the risk to get knocked out completely. I mean, that's a really big risk.
Lane Kiffin saying the quiet part out loud. It's something that I'm sure a lot of people have thought about and that I know you have talked to a lot of people.
Okay, folks. So what Lane Kiffin is saying right there is that going to the SEC championship game can actually cost you an opportunity to go to the college football playoff, because you get a team in the SEC championship game with 2 losses. They lose that game, all of a sudden they're knocked out. So, yeah, you win it, you get a bye, but you lose it. And Ole Miss is one of these teams that if they lose that game and they get to 3 losses, you may not see Ole Miss in the playoff, while Ole Miss could just sit back, not play in this game, and just have an automatic bid as a number 2 seed. So that's where Lane Kiffin is coming from right here. So I want to continue on the video for a second here, and I want to show you the SEC standings, and I'm going to show you the last games coming up in the SEC and kind of project who's in and out.
Does he have a point? He has a point, and they said that it's at least.
Okay, so I want to pause it right there. So I want to pause it. So these are the SEC standings right here. You can see you got 5-1 Texas. You got 5-1 Texas A&M. Now they play each other, so they both have 2 SEC games left, and they play each other the last game. Georgia's sitting at 6-2. They're not playing any more conference games, so they're locked in a 6-2. Tennessee's 5-2. They got 1 more conference game, and Alabama and Ole Miss both have 2 more conference games. So, we're gonna go kind of look at this and see how this could shake out. Let me go to my all right, so let's go look at how this could shake out. So right now, going into the end of the season, as I mentioned, Georgia's not playing any more SEC teams. They play UMass. Tennessee has a non-conference game this week. Texas has a conference game against Kentucky. Kentucky did pull off that big upset earlier this year, so Kentucky's not completely incapable of beating Texas, even though they're almost completely incapable of beating Texas, coming in a 20-point underdog. Let's see who else of those teams. Alabama's playing Oklahoma. That would be a huge upset as well on the road, because Oklahoma's not looked good. They're 1-5 in the SEC. So we know that Alabama has 2 conference games against Oklahoma, and then they have the Iron Bowl against Auburn. So if Alabama wins those 2 big games that they are supposed to win, they will also be 6-2 in the SEC. So they're 6-2 winning those 2 games. Texas A&M, they have Auburn. They should beat Auburn and go to 6-1. So now, let's see. So you're looking at, let's go to the next week. I actually didn't mention the Ole Miss Florida game. So Ole Miss has Florida. Let's go back to the SEC. Ole Miss has Florida on the road. That's not a gimme. They're a 10.5-point favorite. DJ Lagway's back. We saw them beat LSU this past week. That's not a given. So If Ole Miss can pull out that win, and then Ole Miss has the Egg Bowl. Mississippi State's the worst team in the SEC, but again, it's the Egg Bowl, so expect them to be up for that game. So there's a very good chance when I'm looking at going back into, let's go back into the SEC standings here. There's a very good chance. Okay, so this is going to be the key. Texas A&M winner, chances are, because they're probably going to win their conference game besides the head-to-head game. This is an assumption. They're both going to be 6-1 in the SEC. So whoever loses the head-to-head game when Texas play A&M, they're going to be 6-2. So the winner is going to be in the SEC championship game, point blank, period. So now we're looking at the loser being 6-2, Georgia being 6-2, Tennessee being 6-2 if they win their last game, and they should. And then Alabama and Ole Miss both should win their last two games and be 6-2. So you're looking at a situation where you could have the winner of the Texas A&M Texas game first going into conference title, and then you could be looking at 5 teams all at 6-2 in the SEC. And when you're looking at 5 teams all at 6-2 in the SEC, the interesting thing is, how do you determine the tiebreaker from that point? Who's going to get in at that point? Now, head-to-head is, of course, the first tiebreaker, but head-to-head is a big jumble because some of these teams didn't play each other. Some of them did play each other. Some of them, the tiebreakers change if it's a 3-way or 4-way or whatever the case will be. So it's a big jumble. I know in the past they've gone off for whoever the highest ranked team is, they automatically get the tiebreaker. So in other words, if Texas A&M is in a tie with Georgia and Texas A&M is ranked number 11 at the time and Georgia is ranked number 6 at the time, Georgia automatically gets the tiebreaker. I believe that still is the tiebreaker procedure. But so let's talk about, more importantly, what they were saying earlier. So you don't want to get in that title game, because if you get in that title game and you get in a situation where you lose the title game, you could miss out. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to pull up the college football records, the standings for the college football playoffs. So we can sort of look at tonight. They're going to do the rankings again. So it's kind of like mute a little bit. Well, we kind of can look at this and kind of tell who's going to be in what position. So we'll look at the standings, who's where right now, because all of these SEC teams are not making it in, not all of them. So you look at it right now, this is the NCAA, that's the college football ranking. So right now, and I think it's going to change tonight because I think Boise State's going to probably jump in because they're going to be ranked higher than any team from the Big 12. So that'll automatically get them the 4 seed, even though they won't be ranked in the top 4. Gets a little confusion with that, but the 4 highest ranked conference champions are 1 through 4, and they get a bye. So you're looking at number 5 when you go down in the poll. So right now, Texas is locked in good. I tell you what, Texas, if they lose to Texas A&M and they don't play in the SEC championship game, they'll be locked in. If they beat Texas A&M and lose in the SEC championship game, they're still locked in. So Texas is going to take a lot. They'll have to lose 2 games, and I don't think that's going to happen. And I think they're pretty much locked in as one team from the SEC. Alabama, on the other hand, so for Alabama, it would probably be in their best interest to win their last 2 games and miss the SEC playoff, because they don't make the SEC playoff and they win their last 2 games, they're going to have 2 losses. They're going to be in the playoff. However, if somehow they get in the playoff and they lose decisively, they may drop out. Georgia, on the other hand, they're another team. They're done with SEC games. They win their 2 given last 2 games. They probably also aren't well served to go to the SEC championship game, because they're in a situation where they can just automatically get in as well if they're not playing that SEC title game. So these teams right here, Georgia, Alabama, and Texas. So you start to put those teams and stack them in. So now you're looking at Ole Miss, and you're looking at Tennessee, and then you're looking at A&M down there. So Ole Miss and Tennessee, those 2 teams, they really don't need to go to the SEC title game, because if they go to the SEC title game and lose, there's almost no path for them to get into the college football playoff realistically, because if you think about it, they'll have 3 losses, and there'll be SEC teams like Alabama and Georgia who didn't go to the SEC title game and have 2 losses. And then you'll have the winner of A&M, Texas, whoever runs the table, wins the tournament, whatever that's in. So you got 3 teams in front of them. So you lose the SEC title game. If you're Ole Miss or Tennessee, you're pretty much locked out. Now, the big question is for A&M, because they sit at number 15. If Texas A&M wins out, including beating Texas, but loses an SEC title game, I don't know how you could possibly leave them out at that point if they beat Texas and go in. Obviously, they're in a situation where they have to beat Texas, though, because if they lose to Texas and they have 3 losses and they don't make the SEC title game, there's no way you can put them in. So they have the most interesting and probably the toughest situation of everyone, because they're in a situation where they have to beat Texas, but if they have to beat Texas, but if they do beat Texas and they lose in the SEC title game, they're not going to make the playoff. Texas A&M almost has to run the table, which would mean they pretty much have to beat Texas and win the SEC title game. I don't like the situation that Texas A&M is in compared to everyone else, but if I'm Ole Miss and Tennessee, I'm just praying that I win out these last 2 games and I get left out of the SEC title game, like Lane Kiffin said, because the reward for being a number 4 seed and getting a bye is not worth the punishment of dropping out and having to go play in the Cheez-It Bowl or whatever bowl game you're going to get sent down to that no one wants to be in, and most of your players aren't even going to play in that game. So for the SEC, yeah, best situation, no doubt, Texas. To recap it, Texas, unless they lose 2 more times, they're in. They're the best situation in the SEC. Alabama and Georgia, they're also a pretty good situation. They can't lose any more games, but they're in a situation where it's like, hey, let's just not make the SEC title game and not have to worry about all of that. And I know Kirby Smart said all that about the SEC title game is as important to him to win the SEC as the national championship, because it's just as tough. But I think that's all coach speak. You're those teams, you don't want to be in that SEC title game. You're Ole Miss and Tennessee, you really, 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 really don't want to be in that SEC title game, because that's a prime opportunity for you to get knocked out of the playoff. As a matter of fact, Tennessee, with that loss this week, they really don't have any rope, because I'm looking at them at number 10, but I'm forgetting that loss, when that poll comes out, they're going to be hanging by a thread. So they need to close out these last 2 games and not get to the SEC title game. But it's still a scenario where Tennessee could possibly get knocked out, even not going to the SEC title game with 2 losses. It's a scenario where that could happen. So right now, the only SEC team I feel confident that's locked in is Texas, but I do know the SEC will get 4, maybe 5 teams in, and Alabama, Georgia's probably at 90% right now. So it's going to be a very interesting path to see what happens in the SEC, who goes to the playoffs and who don't. So we'll have another video coming up. We'll talk about the Big Ten. We'll talk about other college football. We'll talk about the poll when it comes out. We got the NFL coming up. Talk a little bit of everything, but I thought I would talk a little bit about this topic after watching the Lane Kiffin interview on ESPN. So remember, as always, it's peace and football. So y'all take it easy. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you later.